the ragtag band.
Declaring independence. They laid their bodies down in a bloody war.
Laid their bodies down on a bloody war.
For liberty, for their descendants.
For their descendants.
Dr. Steve-Pieczenik, I want to go to Downey, John, Scott, Rich, Janice, and many others that are patiently holding, wanted to talk to you. This is a short segment, long segment's coming up. But you were making a point about what you think is going to happen in the future. You said things are going to start spinning faster and faster. We were talking behind the scenes. Now we came back live. What point were you just now getting at?
Well, the economy is getting out of control. Our unemployment is too high. We're starting to be taxed. As you see today, nonprofit organizations need to pay taxes for water. Our services in the cities are really falling apart. Our infrastructure is falling apart. We don't have an economic policy. Our inflation rate will go up, as you correctly said. We're in the wars that we don't belong. We have to pull our soldiers back. The Middle East will erupt even further. China will confront us even more vigorously. But the issues really have to come back to the American public. We have to take back the monies in these wars that are not effective, do not really touch our lives at this particular point in time, and really restructure the United States so that we become America first. We really have to concern ourselves with building our infrastructures, building our national security in terms of the debt, and cutting back on the 850,000 individuals that have top secret clearance on counterterrorism. It's absurd. It's absolutely ridiculous, and the American public is paying for all this ridiculous nonsense on terrorism that doesn't exist. Our real terror issue is the financial crisis, which you said in one of the ads. And now we have to focus on America, and we need a leader who understands how to be a non-ideological, hands-on, forceful individual who's had a history of business experience and knows how to lead us forward in terms of the economy.
All right, Doc,
stupid.
Doc, let's do this.
I'm sorry, I don't mean you, but it's what was said to Bush Sr. It's the economy. It still stands on that.
Doc, let me stop you. Since this is a short segment, I promise we'll go directly to calls in the next. Let's get into the economy now. What do we do about the private central banks who make the giant bonuses, take the tax money? I mean, they're not going to stop doing what they're doing. So where do you see America going? What are the main crises facing us?
Well, number one, the banking system has to be rechanged. It's absurd that none of the bankers were indicted, particularly Blankfein, Ron Rubin, who worked for Citibank, received $75 million, was very much in charge as a consultant for all the corruption that occurred in the subprime mortgages. And he was asked, well, what did you do? You received $75 million in bonus. He said, well, I didn't know anything about it. This is our former Secretary of the Treasury. You're talking about Warren Buffett, who owned 40% of Moody's. He took double D rated junk subprimes and then reconverted it to AAA and sold it. And Warren Buffett goes as the sanctimonious priest of entrepreneurship in America and says, no, I had nothing to do with it. These are men who should be investigated. They should be indicted and put in prison. We are not going after the right individuals. The head of Goldman Sachs, the head of J.P. Morgan should be in prison, not just reprimanded. But the reason why they're not is because there's a collusion. This is not conspiracy. This was even written by the American government in the Financial Crisis Report. I recommend that everybody read it. There's an individual whom I don't know, Phil Angelides, who did a brilliant analysis and commission report on how corrupt our banking system is, and it hasn't changed. We have 21st century second-tier banking, which is not controlled, with all kinds of derivatives and all kinds of financial instruments that will, again, precipitate another financial crisis with 19th century regulation. And we have individuals who are turning around in a turnstile who work in our government, and they go back out into the private sector, and they have no loyalty to our country. So our real problems now is really to indict and begin to investigate Wall Street without this nonsense of saying, I know you did bad, but, don't do it again. And the answer is no. They go to prison. You don't just take one guy who's an Indian or a Sri Lankan and put him in because there's an insider trading. You put all of these heads in prison, And this is basically what comes out of the financial crisis inquiry report. And you put a man like Greenspan, who knew what was happening, and hold him accountable instead of allowing him to go on the press and continue this nonsensical story where, yes, I allowed the free trading company, the free trade to go on, and I allowed derivatives to go on, and CDOs and CDSs, but I'm not accountable. That really was a blip in our economy. Or the Paulsons, who were brought in and knew nothing about our financial capability. He was an investment banker. Again and again, the names are out there, the reports are out there, but we don't have courageous politicians.
Wow, Dr. Steve-Pieczenik, got a break. Call straight ahead, and before he leaves us, we'll get more into where we're going financially if this isn't reversed. Very bold information. Stay with us. Let's go ahead and talk to Downey in Texas. You're on the air with Dr. Steve-Pieczenik. Go ahead.
Thank you, Alex. I'd like to ask the doctor, what is more embarrassing or dangerous? Are intelligence agencies' inept, inconsistent, unbelievable narrative and the main media trying to fight it and defend it? Or the fact that there are a great number of well-meaning Americans that believe the fairy tale? Which one's more embarrassing?
Well, you know, you hit it on the head. I think it's embarrassing that the intelligence narrative is so bizarre that the mainstream media, it's an indictment of the mainstream media and everybody involved in it. And it tells you that the New York Times and the Washington Post and all these so-called distinguished newspapers are really, it's pathetic. So I would agree that I think it's very embarrassing. The first one, but that's an excellent question. And unfortunately, you bring up the point that they treat us as if we're dumb rummies, and we're not.
Well, I want Downey to be able to ask another question and then have Dr. Pieczenik elaborate, but I want to say this. I think that's the method to the madness, is they're trying to get all of us to buy into torture being good, TSA sticking their hands down our pants, $2 million Defense Department cameras in one elementary school, studying the kids in San Antonio. All of this is over the top on purpose to give us learned helplessness, and you're a psychiatrist, you know about that, doctor. But more importantly, they're testing the mainstream media and getting them to buy into things that are cartoonish to just train them to accept more and more crazy things. It's like in the last 9 years, I see AP articles every month. Bin Laden puts out new warning, he will strike. And then at the bottom it'll say, this came from a message board with no proof. So they're training us to run with idiocy. I mean, doctor, isn't there some of that going on here, or is it just...
Well, let me say the most important part in my point of view. I don't have to be a psychiatrist, but from a financial point of view, I think what you're seeing is the death knell of the mainstream media. In other words, as much as the president has been desperate and came out with this nonsensical story, what you're seeing is the mainstream media is converting from the so-called journalism that was really practiced very well at Columbia School and elsewhere into a cartoon. They become graphic novels. And the reason isn't so much they're trying to suppress us. The reason is they are losing money. And they are in financial trouble. You know, you follow the money trail in America, and you find out what's the problem.
And instead of going back to what made them great, they're digging their hole deeper. They're digging their hole deeper.
The hole is very deep. I mean, the main holder who's given them a bond that they have to pay 14% interest on is a Mexican who owns the New York Times. Now, the New York Times doesn't do an internal story on them. The Washington Post is in trouble because the Internet is competing with them. The Financial Times is basically an extension of Pearson International, which has never done very well. They were the overseers of my publishing company, Berkeley. They've never done well. They now have a new president who's an accountant and basically really doesn't know anything. They never made a profit. So when you look at these elements and these financial institutions that tried to suppress us, it's not working anymore. That's the comedy of the entire thing. It's a tragic comedy because they have become not newspapers but graphic novels. If you look at the front page of the New York Times, what's the mainline story? Well, girls who go to the prom, second night, that's the major story that you want to know about girls going to a prom, when in fact the entire world is falling apart and there's more news on Alex Jones. Well, how is the New York Times or MSNBC, which is also going under, because cable news networks are going under, the TV shows are going under. They know that because I do TV shows. ABC has not been effective. NBC has not been effective. All of these narcissistic fools that you see on there lauding their own presence as commentators have to compete with Alex Jones, who's not seen and basically is heard, and he has to say the truth. So how are they going to compete with you, Alex? They have financial troubles. You may not. I'm not interested. But the point is you have a growing audience, and the American public is not reading this nonsense anymore.
Well, that's the thing, Doc. I mean, if they tried to do any real news with all of their money and power, we wouldn't be competition for them. I mean, it's scary that a couple of years ago I had 3 million listeners a week, and now we've done the numbers again lately. It's more like 5 million a day, radio, 2 million a day, internet, just on one YouTube channel, 5 million views.
Alex, do you have to advertise on CNN to tell them? Well, then why is the New York Times advertising you and telling you why they are so important when they only have a readership of maybe 600,000?
No, that's what I'm saying is they're paper tigers.
That's my point.
I mean, 1 minute on MSNBC during prime time with 500,000 viewers cost $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. A ad here with a bigger audience, literally dwarfing it, is $300. So that's the last illusion to fall. Is that you pay 15, 20 times for something that is worth far less, and they know that final shoe is dropping. But we could talk forever with Dr. Pieczenik.
No, but the point here is not that. The point is what the gentleman said. It is embarrassing, not for us. It's embarrassing for them because this is the death knell for them in buying the intelligence of false narratives and then reinventing the narratives and trying to dissect the narratives with comedy and absurdity. So, honestly, it's really an indictment of the system, and the gentleman is absolutely correct.
Yeah. Downey, anything else? Downey, anything else?
Yeah, my son's not going to believe I got on. He's 10-year-old and big fan of yours, so I'll just say, A-Boy, that's his nickname. And I do have a question for you. Do you have any plans for this coming 9/11? It's a pretty big,
I don't know. Look, here's the deal. I get invited all over the place, and people want to pay me. No exaggeration. I've been offered a lot of money to go speak at events. I could do that. I could pack 3-4 times what Glenn Beck does. But then to pay for it, you got to sell tickets and stuff. I just more and more I can electronically study, read, sit here in my little crow's nest and tell folks what's over the horizon, and then we go over the horizon and there it is. I can reach, no exaggeration, it's exponential. I'm not bragging. In fact, it's very daunting. It's humbling because I realize I'm just a regular guy. We're reaching, again, it was 3 million a day overall just a few months ago. Now it's over 5 million, and the growth curve is within 6 months we'll be reaching 10 million a day. And so I could go to demonstrations in New York. I could go down and bullhorn Obama. It's just those are pea shooters compared to what this electronic system can do. Now, getting the public to move onto the streets and to the state houses, that's where the power is, and that's what I'm going to have Dr. Pieczenik back on soon to talk about ideas he's got to really get the American people moving. But I appreciate your call, Downey. And I'm not bragging about the power of this show. It actually freaks me out because I just feel like a regular common sense guy who studied things. This stuff's all very clear what's going on. And the establishment, I think, is drinking their own Kool-Aid. They basically poisoned the well of information, but then they drank from it.